Well, hey, good morning, everybody. I hope you're all doing well today. I want to welcome you and thank you for joining today's live stream Q&A that's focused on engine oil and racing. My name is Greg Jones. I'm the editor of Engine Builder, and I'm joined on screen today by three special guests. Sitting together are two members of PennGrade1 Green Team who have more than 40 years experience between them, Ken Tyger and Nick Dixon. Both these guys have a vast knowledge of engine oils, additives, and proper engine protection. And we're also joined by Nitro Joe Morrison. Joe is a NHRA top fuel dragster driver for Leverich Racing. But when he's not behind the wheel of a dragster, he also operates a landscaping business in New Jersey and is the CEO of Right to Breathe, a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving the lives of those living with respiratory difficulty, illness, or disease. Ken, Nick, and Joe, thanks for being here this morning, and we're looking forward to talking some engine oil and racing.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having us. Same here. We just can't wait to get started, and we're pleased that PennGrade1 and Leverich Family Racing did a great partnership, and we're ready to rock and roll for this year.
Absolutely. I'm honored to be on the broadcast here, and certainly honored to be a part of the PennGrade1 Racing family.
Excellent, guys. But without further ado, I'm going to get our experts involved. And if you follow Engine Builder, if you follow PennGrade, you'll know that Ken and Nick are no strangers to us. We've had a relationship for a number of years now. So I want to start with Joe and kick it off with you, Joe. I was hoping that you might just briefly give us some background into your path to driving for NHRA Top Fuel, and a little bit about what got you into racing and how you got to the highest level of drag racing.
Yeah, it's funny. I can honestly say I've been going to the drag races since before I was born. My mom and dad's first date was to Island Dragway here in New Jersey. While they were dating and while they were engaged, mom and dad, not only a drag racer, he would work at Island, work on the starting line when he wasn't racing. Mom wound up working in the timing tower, actually with the telewriter, which was, you want to talk about back in the day. This is with the old Crondeck clocks and all that. And then they got married. Mom was pregnant with me, still going to the track. And then I've just been all about drag racing literally for as long as I can remember. Cut lawns for neighbors and bought my first go-kart when I was 10. First drag race was at Englishtown, actually, in my street-driven Chevelle. Fast forward many years later, got lucky enough to drive a Fiat Altered in the Northeast Timing Organization, or Nitro, as it's called, in the comp class. Engine builder Tony File was a great help to me. He built engines for my dad back in the day, and then was the president of Nitro, and he had helped me with the 706 cubic inch Donovan aluminum block, big chief heads, injected alcohol motor in my Altered, and I would run 720s at 185. Had a lot of success with that car. Won a championship in 2011 where we went to 14 races and won 7. Wound up runner-up the next year. If I would have just shown up at one more race, we would have repeated as champion. But I skipped 2 events that year, so we only went to 12 races and won 6. And literally, if I had the points for just showing up at one more, that would have clinched it. But family obligations. So fast forward, got to drive the Frantic Ford Nitro Funny car for Rocky Perone. In fact, I just drove an alcohol nostalgic car this past Saturday at the Atco Night of Thrills. My best ET was a 628 at 229, so that was a whole lot of fun. Drove a fuel altered called the 134 Fuel Coupe, 1934 Ford-bodied 5-window coupe with a, I think it was a 472 cubic inch Donovan Hemi with the old Mastodon heads. Which were the precursors to the heads they're using on the top fuel cars today.
Right.
And that was a lot of fun. Match Race the Winged Express and Randy Bradford and a bunch of the Rat Trap, a bunch of the the well-known fuel altereds. And finally got my chance. We decided in the fall of 2019 that I was going to get to debut in Top Fuel in 2020. Obviously, with COVID, that was limited significantly, but we did do 4 races last year, qualified for 3, and now, thankful to Gary Leverich and his brother Dan and their dad Bob, giving me a shot in the Top Fuel car, and we're having a whole lot of fun and really a strategic partnership with Kalita Motorsports and Rob Flynn helping us with tuning and making the car run faster. And that's kind of it as quickly as I can go through a whole lot of history, right? But yeah, I've been doing this for a while and using PennGrade1 oils actually, right from the get-go, and really wouldn't use anything else in my altered, just because of the quality of the product.
And that's what I was going to just go to. Obviously you have a lot of driving experience, time behind the wheel. I was wondering if you could share with the folks, what made you ultimately, trust PennGrade.
So it's funny. So when I first started driving the altered, it was owned by a friend of mine and my dad's, and then we wound up buying it and I wound up getting the car. But while this fellow Mike Gillespie still owned the car, we were racing at Maple Grove Raceway, and Mike said he was dead set on PennGrade from day one, and he was the one that introduced me to it. And he's like that, he was just that was it. This was his oil. There was nothing else he was going to use. And I was like, all right, that's interesting. And obviously everything always looked great in the engine, so I knew there was something to it. So at one point we were racing at the Glory Days event, nostalgia race at Maple Grove, time trial run. Go through the traps, everything's good. And what my normal routine is, go through I would, throw the chute lever, lift off the throttle. When the chutes hit, I'd pop it in neutral, flip the throttle once or twice to make sure, clear the motor out, and let it idle, because Maple Grove, if those of you who have raced in Maple Grove know, the shutdown area is very long. So, I don't even touch the brakes, honestly. The chute's slowing it down enough. And then I had to actually put it back in drive and kind of get into the throttle a little bit, drive around the corner. So on this particular run, do that same routine, climb out of the car, and the guy at the top end, safety workers, rolling up the chute, he's like, yeah, you lost a belt back there. I'm like, this is an injected car. There's no supercharger. What do you mean I lost a belt? And then I thought, oh my God, there's only 2 belts on this car. One's the vacuum pump, and the other is the belt to drive the oil pump for the dry sump. And I'm like, oh man, my heart sank. So I looked down, and sure enough, belt's gone. It went at the finish line. So I go through the traps at 73, 7,400 RPM, and I'm thinking, that's it. We just wiped out the crank. You know what I mean? Because the engine was running the whole time until I got around the corner. And it was slowing down on the engine before I dropped it into neutral, and then I put it back in drive and came. Well, anyway, we just packed the car up for the day. We're like, that's it, we're done. Bring the thing home. Drop the oil pan down. We start taking, rod caps off, and all the bearings were absolutely perfect. Couldn't even believe it. Absolutely perfect. I just shocked, so we dropped down the mains. Everything's fine. We retorqued it, put it all back together, ran the whole rest of this. That was in 2007. Ran the whole rest of the 2007 season, ran a couple events in 08. And then we freshened the motor in 2009. Didn't even touch the bearings for that whole time. So at that point, you won't get me to use another oil.
Yeah.
Period. End of story. And it's that zinc content that really is. And actually, Ken, you should talk a little bit about that.
No, I was just going to say, combined 40 years experience, that never gets old. And we continue to hear those stories. And it really is a testament to the protection value of PennGrade1, which really is unparalleled. It has no equal. And that's because of that unique Pennsylvania grade cut that only PennGrade1 affords. You're talking about protecting hardware, engine wear that physically changes the surface componentry of a component that ultimately shortens engine life. So it never fails us. Nick and I, again, combined 40 years experience, it never stops to amaze us when we're talking about or hearing the stories about end users that are willing to pay tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, on their equipment and hardware. But when it comes to the very lifeblood of the engine, they're willing to take that shortcut. Okay, and that's when they run into problems. So you're describing, Joe, something that Nick and I continue to hear and have heard for decades.
Oh, and it's just not like the racing segment, Joe. It's the whole gamut, from classic, custom, hot rods, bracket racers, you name it. We hear these type of stories all the time. I can't tell you enough about PennGrade1. We hear from our customers, and it's just really cool to hear.
Yeah, no, certainly, first person testimonials are always great, and especially from the top of the dragster ranks.
Yep.
I just want to remind audience members, if you guys have questions, if you just are tuning in or got in a little late, please feel free to type in questions that you have for Ken, Nick, or Joe, or all three of them, and we will get to them, throughout today's event. Now, Joe, you're just talking about, when things kind of go wrong, but, even when things are going right, there's enormous stress that, top fuel engines place on all the engine's components, and specifically, it's the job of the oil to kind of keep everything together. So can you just delve into some of those stresses that a top fuel engine, puts on components, and maybe Ken and Nick can also weigh in on, how the oil is really helping keep things protected.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny. We're talking about the injected alcohol motor that, or I should say engine, right? It's funny. A friend of mine always reminds me that a motor is electrical and an engine is
right.
your internal combustion. So top fuel is a different animal completely. There are several things that are kind of counterintuitive about top fuel and about nitro engines in general. Our bearing clearances are a little bigger, 5 to 7 thousandths typically. And we run that nitro 70 oil. Part of that is because of dilution. Even at idle, we're flowing about between 3.6 and 5 gallons per minute at idle through our fuel pump. When we start the engine, we're really a lot of oil pressure, typically 200 plus pounds of oil pressure. And then as I'm staging the car, typically when I'm looking down at the oil pressure to make sure everything's good, we want to see it about 120 pounds of oil pressure at staging. The interesting thing is the violence of the explosions in the combustion chamber. Comparing top fuel to top alcohol, right? Our RPM ranges are a little lower, about 8,500 RPM or so, as opposed to 10,000 plus RPM. The top alcohol connecting rods want to stretch, whereas ours in the top fuel engine, from the force of that explosion, the rods actually want to compress and twist. So we actually put the connecting rods on a fixture and check for compression, from that rod actually shortening, and then the rod actually bending, kind of off to the side. So we're checking clearance on either side. So yeah, interesting that why it's so important and why the oil is so important is if you think about with those bearing clearances between your main bearings and your rod bearings, I mean, that engine is trying to shove that crankshaft out of the bottom of the engine violently. I mean, 11,000 horsepower out of 500 cubic inches. Plus, look, we've got, almost 60 pounds of boost in that supercharger as well. So, so really that's just an absolute severe punishing environment. I mentioned a little earlier, saying that I heard from Gary Selzy that it's so true, but it cracks me up. Gary said at one point, you take a piston, you put it into the Pro Stock engine, right? And in a Pro Stock engine, you give it a kiss, you welcome it to its new home. But you put a piston In a fuel motor, in a nitro motor, you kiss it goodbye. So yeah, we I can tell you that piston to wall clearance is usually at 12 to 14 thousandths, believe it or not, which is a little more than most. Part of that is, and also we use low tension oil rings and gas ported rings for your middle and top rings. But part of that's from heat, right? You need to have that more piston to wall clearance, but we don't even hardly check it because pistons and sleeves are basically treated as consumables. I mean, 5 gallons of fresh PennGrade1 Nitro 70 for every run. Pistons based on what happens. Look, if everything's happy, we can certainly reuse them, and we do up until maybe something gets unhappy, and that can happen real fast. And we'll replace sleeves, in the middle of a turnaround if we have to. But
and Joe, that raises a good point when you mentioned the alcohol and nitromethane with PennGrade1. Anybody that's ever ripped down or tore one of these engines apart after a run or after a season, Kenny and I hear the same thing all the time. This oil sticks. It doesn't come off the crank. It doesn't come off the cam. It just clings all over. Well, that's important when we think about it, when we're dumping all that nitromethane in there or alcohol. What's that typically want to do to an oil? It wants to wash it off.
Yeah.
We don't wash off. We stay there in place because, like Kenny's always told me, it's that full fluid film strength that we need to make sure we protect those components for you guys out there to race.
And Joe, just to piggyback that, maybe you can elaborate on some of the separation value that you've seen with PennGrade1 running your fuel source. A lot of times, Nick and I are asked, what viscosity should I run? And for those that utilize your fuel source, your given fuel source with a lighter viscosity, okay, where the scenario itself would lend to a more pronounced fuel dilution, okay, they're not seeing that with PennGrade1 because of the separation value. So maybe you can add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know I can tell you that, especially with the alcohol, there's a lot of guys that run alcohol for all various reasons, right? I mean, it doesn't run as hot. You can hot lap the car better. Not as affected by atmospheric changes as race gas is. But with the PennGrade, we, especially running that ultra, we'd run the 2050, or sometimes if it, during the summertime, we would just run the straight 50 weight in the injected alcohol engine. And again, I would be able to go run after run after run without having to change the oil in the alcohol car. And again, that was to the point where, like you're making, we don't see the oil and the fuel mixing together.
Right.
So even though there's a ton of fuel getting into that oil, it is not damaging the engine parts, partially because of how sticky it is, and partially because it doesn't really dilute like that. So we could probably reuse oil, or we could even use warm up oil and then use a warm up oil on the run. But we choose not to. But honestly, it's so. Actually, you know what? I think I have a picture of some bearings. So actually, was it Charlotte? I think it was Charlotte, our last race. So TJ Aldrich is our bottom end guy, and we had just run a 411 at 296. We actually, in the middle of that run, we actually had a boost line break. So we had a 1/4 inch boost leak on that run. It probably would have been we were shooting for a low 390 at like 305, 310 just to get us in the show safely. And even with the boost leak, we got in the show. We bumped out. I think it was Luigi Novelli. We bumped out of the show to get in. But TJ's pulling the bottom end apart, and he's like, "Hey, take a look at this." And I took a couple of pictures of bearings as he was pulling them out. So if you want, I can even here. Let me see. I should be able to do that. So there you go. I hope you guys could see that. But right there, that literally is a bearing that had just come out of the engine. Seriously, there's a couple sitting in the bottom of the pan, as he's taking the bearings out. But that's after a low 4 at almost 300 miles an hour. Really, we'll reuse those. And when bearings come out looking that good, we literally will use them again. So, you know, it's just,
But
what can I
again,
say?
Joe, the point of this is how well PennGrade1 protects engines, even the high revving, high horsepower, highly loaded, highly stressed engines. That was a great testimonial to the protection value that PennGrade1 continues to offer and has been offering for the last half century. I mean, that speaks volumes. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, I figure a picture's worth 1,000 words, right?
Absolutely.
Well, guys, I know we can talk about Top Fuel all day long, and I'm sure we'll certainly come back to it throughout the rest of today's event. But we do have a couple questions from the audience that I want to turn to. And our first one is from Rusty Carter. He's asking if you guys could talk a little bit about how performance builds on older engines. He has a Pontiac 461. You know, how do the performance builds on the older engines respond to modern oils? You know, new engines need things like you know, synthetics. Old engines used to run things like 10W30. How can older engines, assuming you have roller cams and no zinc is needed, you know, how can they benefit from today's oils?
Well, to discuss the roller cams, PennGrade1 is known throughout the industry as being the flat tappet roller cam oil. Okay. Even though you don't have that boundary regime or metal to metal contact synonymous with flat tappet, in the roller cams, you starting to see a lot of the premature wear in the needle bearings. Yep. And that's because the modern oils today have been designed with a different agenda in mind. And that is to protect and extend the life of sensitive emission systems like catalytic converters, O2 sensors, what have you. So unless there is a specific need to run a synthetic modern oil, maybe high temperature stability or thermal stability concerns, maybe longevity concerns, the majority of individuals that run synthetic oils today is due to the better volatility that they offer, the better longevity. Well, you're not going to tell a guy like Joel to extend his oil drain just because he can. Remember, you're dealing with the lifeblood of the engine, and there really is no bigger maintenance item more important to extending that engine's life, let alone reducing its repair costs. So keep that in mind. And I'm glad he mentioned the older legacy, like Pontiac, for instance. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the bearing clearances in those older engines were literally designed for the viscosity grades available in those eras. So that's why you had much looser clearances in those engines versus any of today's counterparts. Remember, everything today is fuel economy and emissions driven. Now you take Joe in the high performance side where they're all custom, like that particular customer, Joe, Greg, where you're talking about a custom engine. Nick and I are often asked what viscosity would be best suited for our engine. We always ask that they consider three criteria. Main and rod bearing clearance, absolutely critical. The anticipated ambient temperature operation. When do you plan on using the application? Okay. And then last but not least is whatever the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer and or the engine builder recommend. Now, if you don't have any knowledge of any of that, you can always rely on the word of the previous owner. Okay.
So absolutely. And again, like you said, the older engines, just because they may be rebuilding them and they decide to shove a roller in there, like Ken and I said, over the years through basically, you know, PRI, SEMA show, we had a lot of builders come up to us and they're talking to us. And what they are telling us they're starting to see, especially in the higher performance side of the older engines, is some wear starting, like Kenny said, in them needle bearings. And I'll never forget, I had one of the cam manufacturers come up to me and tell me exactly what was going on. He said, Nick, when you guys came out with that high zinc, high phosphorus, you protected our flat tappet. End of subject. But remember, it's just a progression going from the weakest link to the next weakest link. And he said, the link we're starting to see, even the manufacturers said, without that zinc and phosphorus, we're starting to see some wear into those needle bearings. So that was a good question by Rusty, but again, go back to your OEM, go to your engine builder and get that right viscosity of oil. Or matter of fact, feel free to contact PennGrade1.com online, and Kenny and our technical department would be more than glad to help. Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. And Rusty, thanks for that question. Along the same lines, we have Mark Fanto, who has a 1973 Pontiac Trans Am. It's got a 455 in it, and he would love to use PennGrade1 and is curious about oil viscosity recommendations for it.
Great question. Again, harken back to that era and the viscosities that would have been available to that customer for that application. Most OEMs were very consistent in their viscosity recommendations. Almost across the board, a straight 30 weight was recommended, and there were a handful of multi-grade oils recommended by most of the OEMs. Again, 1030, 1040, 1540, and 20W50 respectively. Now, Nick and I know that our 2050, hands down without question, is the most popular classic vintage legacy historic muscle car and street rod oil we offer today. But again, does that mean that that particular customer has to rely on the 2050 or the straight 30 weight? Of course not. Any of those viscosities that I've just mentioned would be suitable for that particular engine. We're also often asked, how often should I change our oil in our classic car? And what Nick and I typically recommend is every 3,000 miles or once a year, whichever comes first. And the reason for that is very simple. We have to assume that the application itself is going to sit idle or static for several weeks to months at a time. Like where Nick and I live in northern Pennsylvania, where it's Siberia for 4 months out of the year, many store away their classic applications, their classic cars. You never want to leave used oil and the nasty byproducts of internal combustion sitting in that engine. All the acids, the sulfuric, the nitric acid, the soot, the varnish, the moisture, everything that you produce just by starting the engine and running that engine, all that has to come out. So what many people do is drive their vehicles in the spring and summer. They store their cars in late fall, and then in the spring, when the ambient climate is more conducive to driving on a continuous basis, they say, oh, I better change my oil. Okay, so what we want them to do, or at least consider doing, is the opposite. Change the oil and filter prior to that anticipated lengthy storage period, assuring that the engine is going to sit with fresh virgin oil in the block throughout the winter months. Then in the following spring, you can pull out the car, enjoy the drive until the following fall when you repeat the process. Absolutely. Yeah, you don't want to leave it sit with used oil all winter long, because corrosion, you're starting all those nasty things happening inside your engine. So like Ken said, bring it in, shut it down, change the filter, change the oil, start it up a couple of minutes, shut it down, then you're ready to go in the spring to bring your car back out. Now, Nick and I are very old school mentality minded, and we often recommend the heaviest, most viscous oil we can, as long as the bearing clearance and ambient temperature support it, just from the added film strength and the shear stability and even the thermal stability that a heavier, more viscous oil provides. So again, that's probably why our 2050 is our most popular viscosity. But again, I don't want him to feel obligated to run a 2050 or even a straight 30 weight when the 1030, 1040, and 1540 would suit him just fine. And there are some added benefits to running that lighter multi-grade oil, better fuel economy benefits, and maybe a few more ticks and horsepower.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Mark, thanks for that question. Joe, I'm curious, being a driver, have you ever had a muscle car? Did you grow up driving a classic car like that?
Yeah, so actually, when I was 15, I bought a 1969 Camaro. It was an SS clone. It wasn't an original SS or anything like that. But yeah, we was working on that, and then while I had that car, an opportunity showed up to buy a Chevelle with a M21 Muncie wide ratio 4-speed, and it was a 350 board and stroked out to a 383. And that wound up being the first car that I ever drag raced. But yeah, absolutely, you know, as soon as I could afford it. Yeah. I wish I still had both of those cars, unfortunately. My fun on the street these days, I have it was actually, I bought from my dad when he wanted to sell it. I have a 1990 Electric Glide Classic, and of course I run the V-twin PennGrade oil in that too. So
yeah, that's right. PennGrade1 has a line of motorcycle oils specifically designed for our motorcycle enthusiasts. So that's a good point to bring up. We have a 2050 and a 10W40, and both great products.
yep, I run the
PennGrade1 running oils all possess that unique Pennsylvania grade cut that has been in this product, and what makes this product what it is for half a century. And that is not going to change. That unique cut. Nick and I live here in Bradford. We smell the crude oil every day. We know it's being used. So and refined and ultimately sent out to DA headquarters in Lebanon, Indiana, where it's blended with the ad pack, ultimately filled and then sent out to the masses. So it's just it's not going anywhere. We often say not only is the PennGrade1, the original green oil, still alive, it is absolutely thriving. And honestly, I don't think it's ever been more popular than it is today.
Yeah, as the word gets out, and more people are coming into the classic historic market, the racing market, and it's just a fun time right now to be out there supporting our customers and end users.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, one thing that the pandemic did do is get more people working on their cars, and you know, trying to get those projects finished that might have been sitting for a while. So yeah, it's awesome. We got a question here from John Hardy, and it's also related to weight and viscosity. He's asking about two different applications, an alcohol engine and a compressed air engine. He's got a 540 cubic inch and a 632 cubic inch for the compressed air engine, and he's just curious what the best oil, weight and viscosity are for those two applications.
Again, refer to the owner's manual, service manual. The original equipment manufacturer information is critical on viscosity selection. Other than that, we rely on experience. And, to me, it sounds like the wider, the looser the clearances in this particular application, the more heavier, more viscous. A lot of times, when it comes to the warmer ambient climate operation, when you're doing a lot of stop and go, a lot of idling, which is not only tough on the hardware, but of the oil as well, you have to factor all that in. Okay. So that's certainly something that I would hope and expect the customer or this particular gentleman to follow up with either myself or one of my colleagues at DA, that so we can give him the 100% correct answer for that. Again, it's the lifeblood of any application, and there really is no bigger maintenance item to protecting and extending the hardware.
And the alcohol, Greg and Joe can attest to this. Again, we see a lot of our customers that are running an alcohol fueled engine. A lot of them go to our straight weight 40 or 50. And of course, being a mono grade engine oil, a couple things are never going to really happen. One, you're not going to have a shear, and Kenny can address shear, but your engine oil being a mono grade will not shear out of viscosity grade. It's going to stay a 40 or 50. And again, with the unique Pennsylvania grade cut net oil, alcohol has doesn't have an effect on that oil. It separates rapidly, and it won't wash off your film strength off your parts. And again, it goes back to like what Joe was saying, that clingability, that metal wetting capability, it stays there. So as far as the alcohol side goes, you'll see a rapid separation after the engine sits and the oil gets a chance to separate, and it won't wash off. But again, like Kenny said, your OEM or engine builder, get those specifics, get it to Ken or our team,
we can tell him exactly what viscosity we think he should be running.
And really, Greg, to Joe's point earlier, PennGrade1 maintains that lubricity that is so critical to keeping those components lubricated, even under heavy saturation. So again, it's just when you think tailor-made, okay, the definition of tailor-made, you'll see PennGrade1 next to it. So.
Excellent. Thank you. We got a question here from Dave Jorlin. He's going back to, we were talking about Joe's bearing clearances and his top fuel engine, and he's got a question about bearing clearance, and particularly with older engines, is there an advantage to using tighter bearing clearances to change to a lighter grade oil?
Well, again, fuel economy benefits immediately come to mind. Okay, obviously today's much viscosity-wise, much lighter viscosities all promote better fuel economy. Your everyday car, okay, your everyday application may require a 020, 030. I drive a truck that requires a 0W30 engine oil. Okay, it's a V8 engine. Who would have ever thought that a V8 engine would require a 0W30? But then again, am I going to complain when I get 30 miles a gallon? Of course not. Okay, the older cars were much different. Okay, you didn't get great fuel economy, but you had much looser, wider clearances. And because of that, the oils that were designed in those eras were designed on the heavier side. Okay, so fast forward to today, much tighter. So really the first benefit that I immediately think of is fuel economy benefits.
And two, Greg, if he's closing those tolerances up on those bearings, like Kenny said, you don't need that thicker viscosity oil. That's where he can maybe go from, let's say, a 2050 down to a 1040 or 1030 by closing up his clearances. And again, that'll help overall performance. You're not going to have so much drag, trying to pump that thick oil around when you have those tighter clearances.
That's right. And remember, the general rule of thumb with viscosity, in particular when you're running or considering a monograde straight weight or linear viscosity oil versus a multi-grade, is that if you are consistently operating the application in what Nick and I consider the best ambient temperature environment, literally between 60 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit, there really is no reason to consider a multi-grade oil, which really only promotes that quicker pumpability or flowability of the oil on cold starts. Remember, the W in a 10W30 or 10W40 does not indicate weight. It has nothing to do with weight. It actually stands for winter, and it identifies that oil as being best suited for those cold ambient temperature startup conditions.
Correct.
Very good. Ken and Nick, do you guys want to address whether viscosity changes if you're using E85?
Oh, Greg, that's a question Kenny probably gets 10 times a week, because over the years, we see the E85 and the ethanol fuels being present. And I'll ask Ken the question, Ken, can we run PennGrade1?
Of course you can. It's a viable fuel source, and thousands of end users across the country utilize E85 fuel with PennGrade1 high performance. The one thing that we ask that you always keep in mind and consider, okay, is that prior to that anticipated lengthy storage period that we talked about earlier, you change the oil in the filter. And we actually recommend that you run down that fuel source, that E85, put in regular octane fuel, whether it be 87, 93 octane, whatever, okay, just enough so that you can do a proper oil drain and change, and then replace it, fill or drain the fuel reservoir down the nil. Okay, that's how I would store it. The problem with the 85 is that it's hygroscopic in nature, which means it has a very nasty habit of collecting and holding moisture. Okay, the newer oils today have all been designed to run in conjunction with E85. I always want to call it, or continue calling it, a new fuel source. It's not. It's been around for what, 15, 20 years. But the newer oils have all been designed with better rust protection and emulsion retention, and even phase separation was something to consider, because again, that hygroscopic nature of the fuel. So I want it to be known now that E85 can certainly be utilized with the older chemistry PennGrade1 high performance oil. As a tech guy, as tech guys, we want to be the first to at least express the caveat that you must change. Don't leave it sitting in the crankcase. You must change the oil and filter prior to any anticipated lengthy storage period. Don't leave that E85 sitting in the engine. So,
Yeah, very good. Thank you. We got a good question here from Angus. He's asking about a street performance engine with high compression between 11 to 1 and 12.5 to 1. And his question is, how relevant is an oil's phallox rating, which is the load bearing measurement before the lubricant fails and you get metal to metal contact?
sure.
And then a follow up there is, does a high phallox rating of 3,000 to 3,500 psi cause piston drag on the cylinder walls?
Joe, you might be better equipped to answer that, but in relationship to high temp, I'm going to touch on high temp, high shear for a minute. Now, the higher the high temp, high shear of a given oil, the better the oil does at protecting bearings under highly stressed, highly loaded conditions, like Joe's engine, for instance. Now, PennGrade1 has very high temp, high shear rates. I think our 2050 has the highest, one of the highest, if not the highest in the industry. So again, that's a testament to the film strength and shear stability of the Pennsylvania grade base cut that's been in this product for half a century. But in relationship to how it performs on, Joe, maybe you can enlighten us on that.
So the one thing I will say is what we see and what various engine builders that I've worked with have also echoed is that the thicker viscosity oils, it really has more to do with the oil. It has less to do with any kind of drag on the cylinder walls. That's really not the issue. It would just be the fact that it takes more force to push it through the oil pump. It takes, when that crankshaft is splashing through that oil, that's where your quote unquote losses would be with a thicker viscosity oil. So I don't, truthfully, I don't believe, unless I'm mistaken, and Ken, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I would not be concerned with any kind of drag on cylinder walls between, piston to cylinder wall. That would not be it. Now maybe if you're talking about the tension of your rings, that may, provide a little bit. And again, in my world, we make up for all those losses with nitromethane, right? The explosiveness of the fuel. But when you're talking about, more precise, if you're even alcohol engines, when you're talking about not having a power adder and you're looking to reduce the amount of parasitic losses in that engine, then maybe you want to look at tightening up those clearances for a thinner viscosity oil. I know the guys running Pro Stock are using very, very, very light oils because 0.2 of a horsepower is a big deal in the Pro Stock class. For us, again, running the Nitro 70, we're not worried about it. All we got to do to make up for those losses is a little more timing in the magnetos, a little more nitro in the tank, up to what we're allowed. We're allowed a max of 90%, and we actually run a little less than that. We actually run 88.5 in our tune-up. But
Sure.
I hope that answers that question.
No, it did. I sensed the theme. That's where the question was going, and you answered it perfectly. So,
and great to his wear question too. A lot of he was asking about the wear. Remember too, the PennGrade1 high performance line has those enhanced zinc and phosphorus additives in that package, and that helps address that question of wear. That's why we have them where we're at. Kenny, you might be able to talk a little bit about that for him.
As far as the
zinc phos,
absolutely, ZDDP or zinc dialkyl-phosphate has been used in this product for decades. It is important, but it's only part of the puzzle. Okay, we incorporate a typical 1,500 parts per million of zinc, 1,400 parts per million of phosphorus. Okay, that constitutes the entirety of the anti-wear package or the ZDDP package. But again, it's part of the puzzle. Zinc is a chemically active additive. It aggressively fights for the surface. But again, so does the tenacious clingability of the Pennsylvania grade base cut, that unique metal wetting characteristic, that affinity, if you will, to the metal surfaces that really sets PennGrade1 apart. You're talking individuals like Joe and the individuals that were very kind enough to send us inquiries during the live stream. This isn't a hobby. This is a passion, and nobody understands that passion better than the folks at PennGrade1 High Performance Oil and the folks at Engine Builder. Okay, this is an absolute passion, and Joe, maybe you can enlighten us on your passion and why it's so important to run the right oil. Okay, I'd love to hear your side of the fence.
It's funny. I've had people ask me, or say, gee, you must be super competitive. You must, really, want to beat that guy or gal in the next lane. I said, well, of course, right? Nobody pulls your race car up to the line hoping to lose, right? But more than anything else, the funny thing is, yeah, I hate to lose, but I love to win, not for the thrill of being better than somebody next to me, but more so for the fact that in drag racing, look, when you lose, you're done for the day, right? I absolutely love driving race cars. I mean, if you told me that, look, that's it, you're done with Top Fuel, you're done with driving funny cars and altereds and all that stuff, but I'm going to give you this Volkswagen Bug, and you're going to get to drag race this, 19-second Volkswagen Bug. Sign me up. I'm there. I want to race. So back to the passion and why the oil, the protection is so important. It's because the more I win, the more I get to drive. And the more I get to drive, the more that engine has to survive, right? So, in my mind, it's the same thing. That's why do I use it in a motorcycle? I've got 70,000 miles on a 30-year-old motorcycle, and it runs like a champ because I take care of it. I put good oil in it, So that's what it's all about. It's about the love of the sport. It's about the love of driving, riding, whatever you want to call it. Do it every day if I could.
We're very fortunate to be able to look forward to PRI this year and SEMA and Syracuse Nationals, which is just going to be phenomenal from what we're hearing. And, Nick and I don't have racing applications. We don't have a classic car sitting in our garage. So we live vicariously through you, through those that call us and need that help and that expertise to keep that application running and really the application on the road. I want the oil my father used and my grandfather used before him. It is still here, ladies and gentlemen. It's known under the name PennGrade1 High Performance, the original green oil. So we're just very, very proud, and we know all the folks at DA Lubricants, PennGrade, and PennGrade1 High Performance Oil is very proud of this product segment. And 40 years of combined experience. I can't think of doing anything else. We just love helping people. So.
Yeah, well, like you said, everyone in this industry has got an enormous passion for wanting to be in the industry and be the best at what they're doing. And Joe, I think you have a great mentality for just wanting to drive as much as possible, and that's awesome that PennGrade1 helps you do that. Guys, a topic that I really wanted to get into that I know many people have questions about is engine break-in. And I know, break-in can vary engine builder to engine builder and engine to engine. There's different ideas and practices. So I wanted to know if you guys could speak to, what are some of those best practices for ensuring proper engine break-in? And I know certain oils, can do different things when it comes to rings and that type of stuff.
Well, Joe and Greg, you guys can probably attest to this. If you get 10 engine builders in a room, you're going to get 10 different answers on how to run in a motor. Okay. Now, obviously, the selection of the right oil is critical. We offer the PennGrade1 break-in oil SA30, which is 100% conventional mineral based with controlled levels of anti-wear. And many are asking, well, what do you mean by controlled levels? Any good quality engine builder will tell you that they expect some wear to occur during that initial run-in phase. And it's actually that supportive wear that can help facilitate ring seating. It's basically the same reason why you would never select a synthetic oil or something that contains a synthetic component in the brake-in oil, because of that lubricating factor from that synthetic component may interfere with ring conformity. The whole premise of engine braking is to successfully seat the rings. Obviously, you want to protect all of the valve train componentry, but a brake-in oil is designed to be utilized for a very short time frame. Now, for a road motor, if you will, we typically recommend 150 to 200 road-driven miles, followed by a proper leak down or a compression test to validate ring conformity.
Right. And again, like Kenny and I, we've heard stories, Greg and Joe, a customer will call us back and say, I used your brake-in engine oil 30 weight, did everything you guys said and I read about, but I have blow by. My rings didn't seat. And you start asking a few questions and, well, yeah, I went online and found this zinc additive and I put 3 bottles in there. I wanted to make sure I had enough zinc in there to protect the motor. Well, Ken and I can tell them right away, what you've done now, you've protected it so well that you've glazed your rings over. You've never given that opportunity for, like Kenny said, that controlled wear. You want to see some wear in that engine to make sure you get that good seat. And also, I always like proper cam run in. People forget you're running in that lifter and cam together. That spins, you want to make sure you get that good running condition too. And that PennGrade1 brake-in oil helps accomplish that. Now, to go along with that, PennGrade1 also has a assembly engine lubricant. So when you're putting your engine together, we have a product that you would put on your cam bearing lobes and cam bearings and everything when you're assembling that engine. So once you get that engine together using our PennGrade1 assembly lubricant and you go to our brake-in oil, those two products are miscible. It will mix together. So when you're starting that engine, you'll get no filter plugging or skimming of the oil because the assembly lubricant actually solubilizes with the brake-in oil.
And Nick touched on a great point. We strongly advise against the introduction of any aftermarket additive. When you add an additive that's not part of that original formulation, not only do you risk disrupting the performance of that original formulation, but now you've just changed the identity of the oil. It will never perform the way you expect it to. And actually adding an additive can be quite detrimental. So I'm sorry, Joe, I'm probably stealing some of your thoughts, but I'd love to hear what you have to say about proper engine braking, especially when you're dealing with your powerhouse.
Right.
So yeah, it's funny. Our break-in period lasts 2 or 3 minutes and typically includes a throttle whack or two, and then it's right out on the track. So yeah, and honestly, if we really had to, we could probably just run it immediately. And again, that's because of what we're doing is so different than what you would see in a street rod motor, or even a lot of race engines. You know, surprisingly, most race engines are designed to be run hard immediately. But when it comes to your street engine, when it comes to a muscle car engine, you know, again, getting those rings to seat, you know, utilizing that break-in oil in order to have that ring seat is so important. And again, you know, to your point, Ken, you know, other than using the assembly lube, which we use, of course, that really is the most important thing. Is don't put anything else in that oil, you know, because really it's got everything it needs, right? So you got to follow that procedure. You know, if you are the engine builder, then obviously, you know, you've got to use your judgment, you know, in that regard. If you purchase the engine from an engine builder, be sure to follow their directions exactly based on what they've got, you know, and what they put together.
That's a good point.
And Joe, during your break-in period, like you said, 2 to 3 minutes, and you give it a couple whacks. Now, what's the purpose? Is it you're bringing that engine up to temperature, or you're just making sure there's no issues?
What's that break-in period for?
Both, actually. Yeah, we want to get some heat in the engine. Nitromethane is not really flammable. And so it's funny, most people don't realize that unless you're really, you could literally pour a puddle of nitromethane on the ground and you could put a match to it and it's not going to want to light. However, when you compress it, it's explosive. So that's the difference. So you need heat in that engine for that nitro to work properly. And we're also checking for issues, right? I mean, keep in mind, typically we'll leave the crank in it, but pistons and rods are out, right? I mean, the cam stays in, the mags stay in and all that, so we don't have to put that back together. But we're checking for leaks. We want to make sure that everything is operating the way it should. We'll actually, obviously we lash the valves before we run it cold, but then we'll check the valve lash hot, make sure nothing is backing out, anything, silly like that. I mean, obviously, God forbid you have an exhaust push rod come out, you want to talk about bad things happening to your engine. That could certainly be evil, So yeah, it's basically to check out, make sure everything's running the way it should, make sure nothing's leaking, and get some heat into the engine. That's really the purpose of and honestly, we don't have to whack the throttle. We're one of the very few teams that does. We do it because the fans love it and we love it. It's nothing like it, truthfully.
Having a little fun.
Yep.
Guys, we got a question related to PennGrade's break-in oil. Someone's asking, obviously it's designed to, help seat the rings, but this person's heard that it's maybe not the best for flat tappet break-in. Is there any truth to that? Or?
No.
No, that's
it does have less anti-wear when compared to our other PennGrade1 running oils. But remember what I said earlier about the levels being controlled. They must be controlled. If you have too much anti-wear in your break-in oil, you won't have that supportive wear occurring that helps facilitate ring seating. And again, we talked about how wrong adding aftermarket additives can be. To give you some perspective, the break-in oil possesses a typical 1,000 parts per million of zinc, whereas our running oil, again, a typical 1,500. So there is a considerable difference. But the break-in oil utilized for a very short time, remember, it only has a very short lifetime before the rings are seated and it's drained and replaced with your quote-unquote running oil. 1,000 parts per million of zinc is certainly ample to protect all the valve train componentry, especially the flat tappet cams.
And two, people forget, engine builders and typical hobbyists building engines, we all try to keep our engines clean when we're building a brand new engine. Well, we try to keep it clean. People don't realize that the PennGrade1 break-in oil also has a superior detergent dispersant package in there. Because as Ken said, and Joe, you're controlling the wear. So with the dispersants and detergent that we have in there, it's also cleaning that engine up for you. So when you finish that break-in procedure, you change the oil, change the oil, change the filter, fill it back up. Now we know we've got a clean engine, a properly seated engine, and you're ready to go out and enjoy yourself. So it's another valuable asset of a good break-in oil to have the right detergent dispersant package.
Yeah, and really the only oil that experience-wise that Nick and I are familiar with, at least in relationship to break-in, that is an uninhibited, unadditized option would be those running in steel cast iron rings, especially the older guys, the old school guys that were trying to seat the steel cast iron rings. They would literally use a non-detergent oil. And the reason for that is very simple. Without the detergency, running in a non-detergent engine, you would have a lot of an option. You would have a lot of varnish buildup. And that varnish buildup would actually help facilitate those steel cast iron rings seating quicker. So again, there are 10 engine builders in a room, 10 different ways on how to do it. So the more information we have, the more helpful we could be.
Absolutely. We got one here from Doug Wright. He races micro sprints using a 636 cc bike engine on methanol. And he says that their Yamaha R6, revs past 16,000 RPM regularly. And they see a significant difference in rev ET on the dyno with lighter weight synthetic oil. And he just wants to know, he says he typically changes the oil and filter after each event, and he wants to know some recommendations from PennGrade for best protection and performance.
Okay. Yeah. Right away, we have a lot of customers that we've talked to over the years that are into that micro sprint or, the motorcycle engine, CC racing, especially with methanol or alcohol. We have a great product that a lot of them use. That's our PennGrade1 V2 10W40 motorcycle oil. And Kenny can address some of the particulars about it because there's a couple of great features of this product to be used in an application like he's talking about.
Yeah, that product actually meets the JSO MA2 requirements, the very stringent frictional requirements for wet clutch applications. It is also a synthetic blend, which would lend to the better high temperature stability side of things, which obviously those engines can run very hot. The only thing that I would be concerned with is the utilization of a lighter viscosity would lend to a more pronounced fuel dilution the longer you keep that in service. As great as PennGrade1 is in separating itself, it's still a lighter viscosity if you choose to run our 1040 V-twin motorcycle oil. I love the fact, and again, from a tech guy, I love the fact that he's changing his oil after every evening or after every whatever it was you said, Greg, after every pass or every evening. So that's fantastic.
So related to that, we got a guy out there with a 2016 Indian, and he wants to know what oil you would recommend. Is that a 20W50 application or is something different?
Sure.
Joe, you're close to those Indians. Go ahead, buddy.
That's what I run in the V-twin in the Harley is the 2050 V-twin. I love it. I've again been using it for years. So I still, like 70,000 miles, I still have the original bottom end in that thing. So,
and I think the Indians did call for a viscosity of 20W50. And if that's the case, again, our PennGrade1 V2 2050 is good for all three holes.
Yeah, it'll take care of your lubrication needs for your engine, your primary, and your transmission. And the V-twin 2050 is also is JSO MA approved, which again makes it suitable. Now, we have many end users for those large domestic bikes that actually prefer running our PennGrade1 partial synthetic 20W50 in the engine. Now, even though it's never been officially evaluated under JSO requirements, there's nothing in that formulation that would cause any issue with wet clutch. We typically, if you want to use it as a 3-hole lubricant, we typically guide you toward the V-twin motorcycle oil. But if you want to just use it in the engine, the 20W50 partial synthetic would be a phenomenal option for you. The reason most people give is that it does afford you a little bit more anti-wear than the V-twin motorcycle oil.
Awesome. We got one quick one here going back to break-in oil. Does the break-in oil, does that change significantly, engine to engine? This particular guy he builds LS naturally aspirated engines. Would that be different than,
as long as I can remember, Greg, we've utilized a straight 30 weight, and have produced a straight 30 weight for decades. Now we know from our competition there are multi-grades, there are many different flavors or viscosities of break-in oil. It's just really what works best for your application, and that's where you rely on the expertise of your engine builder. They know the clearances. They know when the engine's going to be run. They know how much load, how much stress is going to be in this engine's life, if you will, and the right oil to run, not only run in that motor, and to successfully seat the rings, but what you should consider utilizing after the fact. And maybe, Joe, you have something to add to that.
No, I think you covered it all. That to my level of knowledge, for sure. I'm absolutely, I would agree with all of that.
Excellent. Guys, we got a question from Dan McEwen. He's asking about viscosity index. And for the basis of this question, he's saying, let's say 5W40 has a viscosity index of 200 and a 15W40 has a viscosity index of 100. Can you further explain the viscosity index scale rating? And is that rating the same across all grades? And he's curious if the 5W40 will stay in grade twice as long.
Okay, the higher the viscosity index of a given lubricant, the less the viscosity of that lubricant changes over a given temperature range. That is a very desirable characteristic of any lubricant. So obviously, when you build a multi-grade oil, let's say a 540, for instance, you start with that 5-weight, okay, the base oil, you add your chemistry. It's that chemistry that you add that allows that oil to go from that 5-weight to the 40-weight under operating temperature and then revert back to the 5-weight. Okay, it's called the gap, if you will, and it's the chemistry that allows it. A 15W40 has a smaller gap, has less of that chemistry. The base oil really kind of predicates what the VI would be. Can the additives help? Maybe. Okay, but again, if you're dealing with better quality base oils, the group 2s, the group 2 pluses, the group 3s, and then you get into your PAOs, your group 4s, and etc., obviously are going to exhibit better viscosity indexes or viscosity index ratings, which would lend to that less viscosity change.
Yeah, and again, a good point to that is something like a 10W30 compared to that 5W40 viscosity, you have a greater opportunity for shear to happen. Because remember, you got a 5 viscosity to a 40. That's a big gap in there. We fill that with a certain, like Hemi said, additive package. Well, that opens up the door to more shear.
The more the gap, the more the opportunity for that chemistry to shear
out of specification.
Think about a linear viscosity oil, a straight weight oil. You don't have that shearing taking place. You may lose film strength and shear stability, but you're not shearing out that chemistry that makes a multi-grade what it is. Okay, but again, you're going to get better VI or viscosity index with those multi-grades, especially the ones with the wider gap, than you would certainly with a group 1, group 2 quality mineral-based straight oil, linear viscosity oil.
Perfect, thank you. We got a viewer from Argentina, and he's got a Chevrolet 250 6-cylinder that's boosted with a Garrett turbo for a drag racing application, and he just wants to know your oil recommendations for that.
Well, the first thing I would ask is what type of fuel he intended on using. That certainly helps in my recommendation. But again, consider the 3 criteria that I mentioned earlier: main and rod bearing clearance, the anticipated ambient temperature that you plan on operating application in, and whatever the OEM and or your engine builder recommend. And usually if you just know one of those, that gives you a good idea to better pin down what viscosity you should be running in that particular engine. What has worked for you in the past? Okay, what has worked successfully in the past? Even if you're unsure about any of them, select the viscosity, okay, and then baby step it as to, okay, maybe I should go heavier, or maybe it would be best to go lighter. So there's a lot of questions he needs to answer on his own. And then again, Greg, you can always call us and we can help him out after the fact. Just fill in some blanks for us.
Yeah, absolutely. We got one here from Gino. It's a good question that I'm sure a lot of people might have already asked or are curious about, and that's how long an unopened PennGrade1 oil can be stored for. He's curious if that's years, or if you can purchase a large volume of oil kind of years ahead of when he intends to use it so that it's on hand, or is that not recommended because, you know, that length of time does something?
Yeah, we call what he's asking, Greg, shelf life. What's the shelf life of my oil?
Yeah, and the typical shelf life for a packaged PennGrade1 high performance oil, and I'm talking about the cases, okay, that most people buy and they store in their attics or their garages or their basements. 3 years shelf life. And that's really when the product is stored in the best storage conditions, you know, elevated off the floor, away from any excess light or heat or moisture, 3 things that could accelerate the oxidation process of the oil. Typical 3 years. Now, I've known products that have been stored up to 10 years that were completely viable. You could use them, but we certainly don't recommend that. Just stick to the 3 years, and we assume that you're going to use it much sooner than that. Drums, totes, that type of volume, a little bit different, but again, it's really how you store it. Keep it away from excess light or heat, and definitely moisture. If you leave it sitting outside, you can expect, even in drums, which have been known to breathe and ingress the ambient moisture, ambient dust particulate, don't store your oil, the lifeblood of your engine, outside exposed to the ambient climates. Keep it at least indoors. But 3 years is a good guideline. Joe, you use it much sooner. You don't keep anything for 3 years.
Yeah,
So,
Joe, can you talk a little bit about, you know, what you guys typically have on hand? You know, what do you go through in a season? And, you know, just talk about the volume of oil you're going through.
So yeah, gee whiz. So we use 4 gallons of Nitro 70 for warm up, and we will reuse warm up oil through the weekend. So take 4 gallons, put that aside, and we'll use that more than once. But for each run, we go through 5 gallons of Nitro 70. So you figure if we have all this weekend, going to be racing in Epping, New Hampshire. We have 3 qualifying sessions and then round 1. So you figure 4 gallons put aside for warm up oil. You know, we do 3 sessions in round 1. That's 20 gallons of Nitro 70 right there. You know, we win round 1, add 5 more gallons to go back to round 2. So yeah, we'll use a large volume of oil, obviously, but again, so critical to keeping that fire breathing monster alive. Yeah, we use a whole lot of it. Now in the injected alcohol engine, I could actually, I would change the oil more frequently. I could get 12, 14 runs out of it without having dilution, without having problems with the alcohol, which was amazing. I would change it at 8 just because, you know, and that could, depending on how things were going, you know, with that type of racing, I would get 2 qualifying shots. And then typically we would have 4, maybe 5 rounds. So it would depend. I would use it for a race weekend if I was winning. And if not, then I could get 2 races out of it if we ended up going out in an early round or something like that. But yeah,
so basically, Joe, in that Leverich top fuel racer you go all the way to the end to get that Wally, you can use a drum of oil.
Yeah, just about. Yeah, yep.
So what absolutely. Do you think? How would you compare that? The Wally or a drum of oil? I think we can answer that one.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're happy to keep that fresh Nitro 70 flowing, man. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, guys, I'm going to wrap up today with a question I got from a few audience members, and that's just kind of where they can find PennGrade1. You know, is it available through dealers, online, you know, certain regions? You know, let these folks know kind of how they can get their hands on this great oil.
Yeah, PennGrade1, Greg, we have about, I'm going to say 600 PennGrade1 dealers in the United States. And any of our customers, potential customers, can go to our website, which is www.penngrade1.com. And you'll go to our homepage and you'll find a tab that says Store Locator. Click on the Store Locator. It asks for your zip code. And once you put your zip code in, all your local PennGrade1 dealers will come up within a 50-mile, 100-mile radius for you.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, guys, I know we can talk about oils and engines and racing all day long, but we're going to close out today's event here at this point. So again, I just want to thank you, Ken, Nick, and Joe for all being here today. And again, thank you to the audience for giving us tons of great questions and participating. I know I enjoyed it. Again, I want to thank you all for being here. And guys, thank you guys for answering questions and giving your expert advice.
Thank you, Greg, and all the folks at Engine Builder. And Joe, it's been an honor and a pleasure. And my good friend and colleague, Nick Dixon, and all the folks at DA, Lubricants, PennGrade1. Thank you for making this happen. And I hope everybody found this informative and interesting, and we had fun doing it. So
Awesome.
All
Yeah,
I'm going to say is go Nitro Joe.
get them this weekend,
I
Joe.
want that trophy, Joe.
Yeah, me too. Tell you what, thank you, Greg. I appreciate it. Ken and Nick, great working with you guys. And again, an honor to be a part of the show, and honor to be a part of the PennGrade1 racing family. So thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. Had a lot of fun.
Yeah, excellent, guys. Well, make sure that you follow Engine Builder, you follow PennGrade, you follow Leverich Racing, and you'll get plenty more engine racing related content in all three of those places. So thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.
Goodbye.
Bye now.